His real agenda is to sell Americans more dirty oil from the tar sands in Alberta, the fastest growing source of global warming emissions in Canada. He's not concerned for the security of your kids' future. Instead, he wants to give special treatment to tar sand companies so they can keep polluting.
That's a political partisan TV attack ad. I love that kind of stuff. But that wasn't paid for by any political party. That was paid for by a registered environmental charity that gets a tax break under the Income Tax Act. It's called Environmental Defense. Except you're not supposed to be a partisan attack dog if you're a charity. Joining me now from Vancouver is someone who knows a little bit about this problem. His name is Patrick Moore. You know, we've had him on the show before. He was one of the co-founders of Greenpeace almost 40 years ago, and he quit that organization. Well, I'll invite him to tell us why. Patrick, welcome back to the program.
Nice to be with you again, Ezra.
Now, I just looked at that ad, and it was something that the Liberals or the NDP could have paid for. And hey, I love raucous debates. You know me, Patrick. Let the fighting and the arguments begin. But that ain't charity work. How does something that's supposed to be a charity get so far off the rails and become a political attack dog?
Well, I'm just glad that we've taken notice of this. We can thank Vivian Krause for her research, almost single-handedly exposing the tens of millions that are coming in for this political activity. I mean, political is a somewhat difficult word to define, but when it goes this far, it's obvious. You know, back in the day of Greenpeace, we weren't afraid to take on the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, but also in the middle of the peace movement and the Cold War, we took on the Russian whalers, which, you know, to some of the peace side people was like they were on the side of the Russians against the Americans in the Cold War. So we were willing to take strong positions on some very important issues. But gradually, I felt that Greenpeace was taken over by the extreme left, by the politicos who were very clever with power. And once we had power, and when I left, we were bringing in $100 million a year, so that's a fair amount of strength. And once that happened, the whole thing changed and did become more purely political. I remember fighting to retain Greenpeace Canada's charitable status when I was president in my last years in the early 80s. I succeeded at doing that by keeping us more on the straight and narrow from a political point of view. But it wasn't long after I left that Greenpeace Canada lost its charitable tax status, and I think that was the correct decision. And it certainly is the correct decision in this case, where these groups, with a lot of funding coming from outside the country, are basically trying to undermine our energy policy. And I don't think environmentalists should be in charge of whether a pipeline gets built or not. I think they should be working on making the pipeline safer and making good recommendations on how we can do that. But to say, no, sorry, Canada cannot export oil to Asia as being some kind of environmental policy, it's purely political.
You know, that's the thing. I mean, I find myself in a bit of a conundrum here because I love the oil patch. I believe our oil is ethical, and I believe our environmental and safety standards are the world's best. But on the other hand, I also believe deeply in free speech, even for foreigners, frankly, even for foreign governments. I just think that the way to balance that is to have full disclosure. Now, I don't think that foreign governments should be able to buy their way into our election campaigns. That should be a Canada-only thing. But if the Saudi embassy wants to spend $10 million in TV ads demonizing the pipeline, you know what? The free speech Nick within me, Patrick, would say, yeah, let them do it. Maybe just have them disclose that that's OPEC money so we can understand those are our competitors. Do you think that there's a happy middle ground here? I mean, I think for sure they should lose their charitable status. But to me, if a foreign foundation wants to muck around in our politics, as long as they're complying with election laws and they're disclosing it, I think Canadians are smart enough to dismiss foreign lobbyists just as that, foreign lobbyists.
Well, first, I think they should have to register as lobbyists. I've done so when I've acted as a lobby for an interest group. I'm not doing that now. I'm not a lobbyist at the moment, but I have been at times. And there's special laws about, you know, for each province and the federal level, that if you are going in to see a politician representing an interest group, you should have to register as a lobbyist. And secondly, you shouldn't be allowed to issue tax receipts for doing that kind of work. I mean, it's simply not charitable to do what they're doing. Charitable means there's no doubt about the fact that what you are doing is good for people or the world. And these guys, they think they got a monopoly on truth. I know Macmillan said exactly that in his speech before the Economic Club, that all we're doing is telling the truth. Well, that's their truth, and their truth is liable to drive us into poverty and mass death if we were, you know, going by what they said: no more oil, no more coal, no more nuclear, no more hydro, no more energy. That's what they're saying, and that is basically a suicide pact.
You know, I've read the Canada Revenue Agency guidelines on what is political or not. Now, partisan means you're supporting one candidate or one party. So that Environmental Defense attack ad on Stephen Harper, that's partisan, and there's zero partisanship allowed. But even politics, their definition, I think it's a pretty good one, which is if you have to persuade someone, if there's a big, lively debate about something, a controversy, then it's not held as a common good. If you have to convince someone of something, then by definition, it's not something we all agree on. Now, you don't have to convince someone that helping orphans or widows or a food bank is a good thing. There's no dispute about that. That's why we give those things charitable status. Helping a hospital, charitable status. Mother Teresa, charitable status. But something like, well, natural gas is better than nuclear power, or oil sands are worse. That is, by definition, in dispute, and by definition should not have tax status. Do you think, though, here's my tough question for you, Patrick. Guys like David Suzuki have an enormous public following. They're, in some ways, treated like saints, certainly by the mainstream media. Do you think Revenue Canada will have the political courage to implement the Income Tax Act and say, hey, David Suzuki, hey, Tides Canada, you may be rich and popular, but you can't get a charitable status anymore. Keep talking what you're talking, but don't bill us as a charity. Do you think the auditors have the guts to do that?
Well, I certainly hope so, because they are skewing the public understanding of many issues in a very irresponsible way. For, you know, just on the issues like forestry, for example, one of Canada's largest industries, David Suzuki has done everything in his power to make people think forestry is the destruction of the planet, when in fact it is providing the most important renewable resource in the world, and we're doing it sustainably. Canada isn't losing forest. We've actually gained a little bit of forest in the last couple of decades. And same with the United States. Even with their 300 million people consuming more wood per capita than any other country in the world, they are not losing any net forest area because they're reforesting the area that they are harvesting and providing a vast amount of habitat for wildlife and cleaning the air and cleaning the water and putting oxygen in the atmosphere, and yet they are characterized as some kind of evil earth destroyers, which gives the urban public, who are not out there seeing what's going on, gives them a completely skewed opinion, which is irresponsible and actually environmentally irresponsible, never mind just untrue.
Patrick Moore, we've got to end it there. By the way, Patrick Moore's book, his autobiography, Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, that is must reading for anyone interested in this issue. Thanks for joining us today, my friend.
Thank you, Ezra.
Bye-bye.